Welcome to this collection of mini science fiction stories from some of the best authors of the 50s and 60s. We'll start with an amusing one, The Eyes Have It by Philip K. Dick, and turn a little more serious with Dogfight 1973 by Mack Reynolds. Then things start getting darker with Earthbound by Lester Del Rey, and really quite chilling as we finish with Countdown by Julian F. Groh. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. The Eyes Have It by Philip K. Dick, narrated by William Skye. It was quite by accident I discovered this incredible invasion of Earth by lifeforms from another planet. As yet, I haven't done anything about it. I can't think of anything to do. I wrote to the government, and they sent back a pamphlet on the repair and maintenance of frame houses. Anyhow, the whole thing is known. I'm not the first to discover it. Maybe it's even under control. I was sitting in my easy chair, idly turning the pages of a paperbacked book someone had left on the bus when I came across the reference that first put me on the trail. For a moment, I didn't respond. It took some time for the full import to sink in. After I'd comprehended, it seemed odd I hadn't noticed it right away. The reference was clearly to a non-human species of incredible properties, not indigenous to Earth. A species, I hasten to point out, customarily masquerading as ordinary human beings. Their disguise, however, became transparent in the face of the following observations by the author. It was at once obvious the author knew everything. Knew everything and was taking it in his stride. The line, and I tremble remembering it even now, read, "His eyes slowly roved about the room." Vague chills assailed me. I tried to picture the eyes. Did they roll like dimes? The passage indicated not. They seemed to move through the air, not over the surface. Rather rapidly, apparently. No one in the story was surprised. That's what tipped me off. No sign of amazement at such an outrageous thing. Later, the matter was amplified. His eyes moved from person to person. There it was, in a nutshell. The eyes had clearly come apart from the rest of him and were on their own. My heart pounded and my breath choked in my windpipe. I had stumbled on an accidental mention of a totally unfamiliar race, obviously non-terrestrial, yet to the characters in the book it was perfectly natural, which suggested they belonged to the same species. And the author? A slow suspicion burned in my mind. The author was taking it rather too easily in his stride. Evidently he felt this was quite a usual thing. He made absolutely no attempt to conceal this knowledge. The story continued. Presently his eyes fastened on Julia. Julia, being a lady, had at least the breeding to feel indignant. She is described as blushing and knitting her brows angrily. At this I sighed with relief. They weren't all non-terrestrials. The narrative continues. Slowly, calmly, his eyes examined every inch of her. Great Scott! But here the girl turned and stomped off and the matter ended. I lay back in my chair gasping with horror. My wife and family regarded me in wonder. "What's wrong, dear?" my wife asked. I couldn't tell her. Knowledge like this was too much for the ordinary run-of-the-mill person. I had to keep it to myself. "Nothing," I gasped. I leaped up, snatched the book, and hurried out of the room. In the garage, I continued reading. There was more. Trembling, I read the next revealing passage. He put his arm around Julia. Presently, she asked him if he would remove his arm. He immediately did so, with a smile. It's not said what was done with the arm after the fellow had removed it. Maybe it was left standing upright in the corner. Maybe it was thrown away. I don't care. In any case, the full meaning was there, staring me right in the face. Here was a race of creatures capable of removing portions of their anatomy at will. Eyes, arms, and maybe more. Without batting an eyelash. My knowledge of biology came in handy at this point. Obviously they were simple beings, unicellular, some sort of primitive single-celled things. Beings no more developed than starfish. Starfish can do the same thing, you know. I read on. and came to this incredible revelation, tossed off coolly by the author without the faintest tremor. Outside the movie theatre, we split up. Part of us went inside, part over to the cafe for dinner. Binary fission, obviously, splitting in half and forming two entities. Probably each lower half went to the cafe, it being farther, and the upper halves to the movies. I read on, hands shaking. I had really stumbled onto something here. My mind reeled as I made out this passage. "I'm afraid there's no doubt about it. Poor Bibney has lost his head again." Which was followed by, "And Bob says he has utterly no guts." Yet Bibney got around as well as the next person. The next person, however, was just as strange. He was soon described as totally lacking in brains. There was no doubt of the thing in the next passage. Julia, whom I had thought to be the one normal person, reveals herself as also being an alien life form, similar to the rest. Quite deliberately, Julia had given her heart to the young man. It didn't relate what the final disposition of the organ was, but I didn't really care. It was evident Julia had gone right on living in her usual manner, like all the others in the book. Without heart, arms, eyes, brains, viscera, dividing up in two when the occasion demanded. Without a qualm. Thereupon she gave him her hand. I sickened. The rascal now had her hand as well as her heart. I shudder to think what he's done with them by this time. He took her arm. Not content to wait, he had to start dismantling her on his own. Flushing crimson, I slammed the book shut and leaped to my feet. But not in time to escape one last reference to those carefree bits of anatomy whose travels had originally thrown me on the track. Her eyes followed him all the way down the road and across the meadow. I rushed from the garage and back inside the warm house, as if the accursed things were following me. My wife and children were playing Monopoly in the kitchen. I joined them and played with frantic fervour, brow feverish, teeth chattering. I had had enough of the thing. I want to hear no more about it. Let them come on. Let them invade Earth. I don't want to get mixed up in it. I have absolutely no stomach for it. Dogfight 1973 by Mack Reynolds. Narrated by William Skye. Flying at 1600 miles per hour, you act with split-second timing after you sight the enemy. And you're allowed only one mistake. Your last. My radar picked him up when he was about 500 miles to my north-northeast and about 45 miles above me. I switched the velocity calculator on him as fast as I could reach it. The enemy ship was doing 16, possibly even 16 and a half. I took the chance that it was most likely an IVAR interceptor at that speed, and punched out a temporary evasion pattern with my right hand, while with my left I snapped an IVAR K-12 card into my calculator along with his estimated speed, altitude, and distance. It wasn't much to go on as yet, but he couldn't have much more on me, if as much. Inwardly, I congratulated myself on the quick identification I'd managed. He was near enough now for my visor screen to pick him up. At least he was alone, that was something. My nearest squadron mate was a good minute and a half away. It might as well have been a century. Now this is what is always hard to get over to a civilian, the time element. Understand it will take me a while to tell this, but it all took less than 60 seconds to happen. He had guessed my evasion pattern already, either guessed it or had some new calculator that was far and beyond anything our techs were turning out. I could tell he'd anticipated me by the bong sonic roll he slipped into. I quickly punched up a new pattern based on the little material I had in the calculator. At least I'd caught the roll. I punched that up hurriedly, slipped it into the IBM, guessed that his next probability was a pass, took a chance on that, and punched it in. I was wrong there. He didn't take his opportunity for a front-on pass. He was either newly out of their academy or insultingly confident. My lips felt tight as I cancelled the frontal pass card, punched up 2 more to take its place. The base supervisor cut in on the phone. "It looks like old Dimitri himself, Jerry, and he's flying one of the new K-12A models. Go get him, boy." I felt like snapping back. He knew better than to break in on me at a time like this. I opened my mouth, then shut it again. Did he say K-12A? Did he say K-12A? I squinted at the visor screen. The high tail, the canopy, the oddly shaped wing tanks. I'd gone off on the identification. I slapped another evasion pattern into the controls, a standard set. I had no time to punch up an improvisation. But he was on me like a wasp. I rejected it, threw in another set. Reject. Another. Even as I worked, I kicked the release on my own calculator, dumped it all, selected like a flash an Ivar K-12A card, and what other estimations I could make while my mind was busy with the full-time job of evasion. My hands were still making the motions, my fingers were flicking here, there, my feet touching here, there. But my heart wasn't in it. He already had such an advantage that it was all I could do to keep him in my visor screen. He was to the left, to the right. I got him for a full quarter second in the wires, but the auto gunner was too far behind. Much too far. His own guns flicked red. I punched half a dozen buttons, slapped levers, tried to scoot for home. To the left of my cubicle, 2 lights went yellowish, and at the same time my visor screen went dead. I was blind. I sank back in my chair, helpless. The speed indicator wavered, went slowly, deliberately to 0. The altimeter died, the fuel gauge. Finally, even the dozen or so trouble indicators, here, there, everywhere about the craft. $15 million worth of Warcraft was being shot into wreckage. I sat there for a long, long minute and took it. Then I got to my feet and wearily opened the door of my cubicle. Sergeant Walters and the rest of the maintenance crew were standing there. They could read in my face what had happened. The sergeant began, "Captain, I grunted at him. "Never mind, Sergeant. It has nothing to do with the ship's condition." I turned to head for the operations office. Bill Dixon strolled over from the direction of his own cubicle. "Somebody said you just had a scramble with old Dimitri himself." "I don't know," I said. "I don't know if it was him or not. Maybe some of you guys can tell a man's flying, but I can't." He grinned at me. "Shot you down, eh?" I didn't answer. He said, "What happened?" I thought it was an Ivar K-12, and I put that card in my calculator. Turned out it was one of those new models, K-12A. That was enough, of course. Bill grinned at me again. "That's 2 this week. That flak got you near that bridge, and now you get—" "Shut up," I told him. He counted up on his fingers elaborately. "The way I figure it, you lose 1 more ship and you're an enemy ace." He was irrepressible. "Damn it," I said, "will you cut it out? I've got enough to worry about without you working me over. This means I'll have to spend another half an hour in operations going over the fight. And that means I'll be late for dinner again. And you know Molly." Bill sobered. "Gee," he said, "I'm sorry. War is hell, isn't it?" Earthbound by Lester Del Rey. Narrated by William Skye. He wanted above anything else to go into space. He had been waiting for it, a long time. It was hours after the last official ceremony before Clifton could escape the crowd of planet lubbers with their babblings, their eligible daughters, and their stupid self-admiration. They'd paid through the nose to get him here, and they meant to get their money's worth. The exit led only to a little balcony, but it seemed to be deserted. He took a deep breath of the night air, and his eyes moved unconsciously toward the stars. Coming back to Earth had been a mistake, but he'd needed the money. Space Products Unlimited wanted a real deep space hero to help celebrate its 100th anniversary. He had just finished the regulation of Rigel, so he'd been picked. Damn them and their silly speeches and awards. And damn Earth! What was 1 planet when there were 1 billion up there among the stars? From the other side of a potted plant there was a soft sigh. Clifton swung his head, then relaxed as he saw the other man was not looking at him. The eyes behind the dark glasses were directed toward the sky.
Aldebaran, Sirius, Deneb, Alpha Centauri,
the voice whispered. It was a high-pitched voice with an odd accent, but there was the poetry of ancient yearning in it. He was a small, shriveled old man. His shoulders were bent. A long beard and the dark glasses covered most of his face, but could not entirely conceal the deep wrinkles, even in the moonlight. Clifton felt a sudden touch of pity and moved closer without quite knowing why.
"Didn't I see you on the platform?" "Your memory is very good, Captain. I was awarded publicly for 50 years of faithful service making space boots. Well, I was always a good cobbler, and perhaps my boots helped some men out there."
The old man's hand swept toward the stars, then fell back to grip the railing tightly.
"They gave me a gold watch, though time means nothing to me, and a cheap world cruise ticket. As if there were any spot on this world I could still want to see."
He laughed harshly.
"Forgive me if I sound bitter, but you see, I've never been off Earth."
Clifton stared at him incredulously.
"But everyone but me," the old man said. "Oh, I tried. I was utterly weary of Earth, and I looked at the stars and dreamed. But I failed the early rigid physicals. Then, when things were easier, I tried again. A plague grounded the first ship. A strike delayed another. Then one exploded on the pad, and only a few on board were saved. It was then I realized I was meant to wait here on Earth, and nowhere else. So I stayed, making space boots."
Pity and impulse forced unexpected words to Clifton's lips.
"I'm taking off for Rigel again in 4 hours, and there's a spare cabin on the Mary Lou. You're coming with me."
The old hand that gripped his arm was oddly gentle.
"Bless you, Captain, but it would never work. I'm under orders to remain here."
"Nobody can order a man grounded forever. You're coming with me if I have to drag you, Mr.
Ahasuerus."
The old man hesitated, as if expecting the name to mean something. Then he sighed and lifted his dark glasses. Clifton met the other's gaze for less than a second. Then his own eyes dropped, though memory of what he had seen was already fading. He vaulted over the balcony railing and began running away from Ahasuerus, toward his ship and the unconfined reaches of space. Behind him, the eternal wanderer tarried and waited. Countdown by Julian F. Grow. Narrated by William Skye. The moment is at hand, the fingers are poised. This is what comes next. 10 years of uneasy peace since the hour of tragedy. 10 apprehensive, uneasy years, pungent with fear, with hatred, distrust. 10 years like 10,000 in the past of man. 10 units out of the infinite, out of time the eternal, immutable, non-existent dimension. 9 planets spinning. 9 spawn of the sun, one of them nascent, a hair's breadth from its heritage. But which heritage? It could choose. The fertile warmth of the parent star, or the star's pure fire. 8 periods in the gibberish of the sifters of chaos. 8, Precambrian to Triassic, while flame cooled and became stone and lay latent, lambent, pent awaiting release. Before from the fetid Jurassic darknesses, the beasts of warm blood crawled. 7 seas, once the womb of life, then too long its call. The common birthplace, then a strangling wall between. Once too briefly a high road for the courageous, now a new kind of night for marauders, shadowed shapes armed with pieces of the sun. 6 masses of land, cradles for the genesis of a myriad species, and one of them man. Man the creator, the protector, the destroyer, builder of shrines, burner of saints, Good father, good soldier, good killer. Man, the creature of choice. 5 nations remaining. Sparse ruddy fruit of 1,000 wars, nurtured by 1 billion dead. 5 the bloody consequence of union into pack, into tribe, into fief, to kingdom, empire and nation. The threads of history gathered finally into 5 flags, entwined in alliance at this point in time by a searing wind. Pan-American, Sino-Russian, Afro-Arabian, racial armies, sons of the first beast to kill from anger, fathers of the unborn. Armies in the terrible truce of the fusion bomb, waiting. 4 far-flung networks, metal wire and machines and vacuum. Interlinked webs of detection and retaliation or attack within the web's bombs. Within the bomb's targets, mapped and doomed by a spark. Each alliance a network of aimed and armed missiles, in deserts, on mountaintops, hidden deep and in the surrounding seas. Each alliance a pattern of targets, always an instant from obliteration. Such had come to Britain in its hour of tragedy when the last savage hope of empire regained, dissolved into vapour, and the isles became slag. There the 4th network corroded under a shroud of ash, but the surviving 3 ceaselessly hummed. 3 men, of one species but riven somehow at this point in time by pigment, tongue and details of dress. A man from Brownsville, a man from Vladivostok, a man from Khartoum, buried deep in the hearts of the networks, each already entombed and so safe from death. Each chosen by his masters to be the knock of the arrow, the final factor. Yet not an arrow, for each network of course was aimed at both the others. A moment's trust is fatal once the truce is broken, the masters reasoned, and so the bombs and the men were trained. 2 buttons, a choice under the fingers of each of these men. 1, red, to loose deliberately the double-pronged torrent of bombs if the masters so decreed. The other, white, to cancel the launching command broadcast automatically if massive radiation spewed across the homeland, a vast vicious death reflex. Each man, then, if the detectors told, had the decision, error or attack. Fail or be unable to press the white instantly, and the counter-attack, if such it was, began. This then was the Master's last concession to the human factor, their grudging one to humanity. And like most of the Master's concessions to the masses, it was false. Identically, in each network, the white button was a dummy. The real choice was, as it always was, red button, kill, or wait yet a while more. The men in the tombs, unknowing, knew this was the choice. One man's brain, whosoever, however carefully masters may mould it, is a fragile thing. 10,000 years have not fitted man to live with himself. Could a single man live with the lives of 2 billion? The choice, distillate of 100 centuries of pain, the weariness of a species with race. Blame them, blame all. One of the men sitting in a cold tomb sweated. His finger hovered over the red button, trembled, and fell. Thanks for listening to this collection of mini sci-fi stories. If you enjoyed them, hit the like button and subscribe for more sci-fi read-alongs every Monday and Friday. I have already narrated several stories by Philip K. Dick and Lester Del Rey, as well as a couple by Mack Reynolds. For your next one, I recommend a Reynolds story called A Zlaw for Your Trouble. A link to that video is on screen now.